The sun had barely kissed the horizon when Hannah Carter's hands split open again, fresh blood mixing with the calluses that had become her only armor against the endless work at Chisum Ranch in New Mexico Territory. It was 1878, and the ranch sprawled across thousands of unforgiving acres where cattle outnumbered people 10 to 1. Hannah had arrived 6 months ago with nothing but a worn carpetbag and determination etched into her 20-year-old bones. Her father's debts had followed her all the way from Missouri, and working at the ranch kitchen was the only way to pay them down while keeping herself fed and sheltered. The massive cast iron pot she'd been scrubbing for the past hour finally gleamed clean, but the lye soap had eaten through what little protection her skin had left. She set the pot aside with trembling arms and looked down at her palms. The blisters had opened in ugly red patterns, some bleeding, others filled with clear fluid that would only make tomorrow's work more agonizing. "Miss Carter, you done with them dishes?" Old Martha called from the doorway of the kitchen house. The older woman had been working at Chisum Ranch for 15 years, and her hands bore the permanent scars of decades of labor. "Yes, madam," Hannah replied, wiping her hands carefully on her apron. Even that gentle touch made her wince. "Good. Mr. Chisum's expecting 30 hands for breakfast tomorrow, so we'll need to start the biscuits before dawn. Get yourself some sleep." Hannah nodded and stepped out into the cooling evening air. The ranch house loomed large against the darkening sky, but she headed toward the small cabin she shared with 2 other kitchen workers. Her feet ached almost as much as her hands, and exhaustion pulled at every muscle in her body. She hadn't made it more than 20 paces when a figure materialized from the shadows near the stable. Hannah jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Easy there," a deep voice said, and the man stepped into the light spilling from the bunkhouse windows. "Didn't mean to startle you." Hannah recognized him immediately. James Walker, one of the ranch's most skilled cowboys. He'd been working at Chisum Ranch for 3 years, and unlike many of the rougher hands, he had a reputation for being fair and honest. At 24, he'd already earned the respect of even the oldest ranch hands. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat, and his eyes held a kindness that seemed out of place in the harsh landscape. "Mr. Walker," Hannah said, pressing her damaged hands against her skirt. "I apologize. Long day, James," he corrected gently. "And I'd say that's an understatement." He tilted his head, studying her in the fading light. "Saw you working through the window earlier. That's a lot of dishes for one person. It's what I'm paid to do, still." He took a step closer, and Hannah noticed he was holding something wrapped in cloth. "Here. Martha asked me to bring this to you, said she forgot to mention it." Hannah reached out automatically, then gasped as the movement sent sharp pain through her palms. The small bundle dropped to the dirt between them. James moved faster than she expected, catching her wrist before she could pull away. His calloused fingers turned her hand gently toward the light, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he muttered. "How long have they been like this?" "It's nothing," Hannah tried to say, but James was already leading her toward the bench outside the bunkhouse. "Sit," he ordered, his voice firm but not unkind. Hannah wanted to protest, wanted to maintain her dignity and independence, but the truth was her legs were shaking from fatigue and pain. She sat. James disappeared into the bunkhouse and returned moments later with a leather satchel. He knelt in front of her, setting the bag beside him and pulling out a clean cloth and a small tin. "Give me your hands," he said softly. "Really, I'm fine. I just need to rest tonight," James interrupted, looking up at her. His eyes were serious, almost stern. "You work yourself to death out here and nobody benefits. Not you, not the ranch, nobody. Now please, let me help." There was something in his voice that made Hannah's protests die in her throat. She extended her trembling hands, palms up, feeling strangely vulnerable in the gathering darkness. James studied her hands for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Then, with movements so gentle they seemed impossible from someone who spent his days wrestling cattle and breaking horses, he began to clean the wounds. He dampened the cloth with water from his canteen and carefully wiped away the blood and dirt, his touch feather light. "This is going to sting," he warned before opening the tin. The salve inside smelled of herbs and something medicinal. He applied it with careful precision, making sure to cover every blister and cut. Hannah bit her lip against the burning sensation, but it faded quickly, replaced by a cooling relief. "Where'd you learn to do this?" she asked, watching his bent head as he worked. "My mother was a healer back in Texas. Before she passed, she taught me what she could, said a man ought to know how to tend wounds, whether they're on a horse or a person." He glanced up briefly, a sad smile crossing his face. "She was right about most things. I'm sorry about your mother. It was 8 years ago, still miss her every day." He finished with one hand and moved to the other. "What brought you out to New Mexico territory? You don't sound like you're from around here." "Missouri originally," Hannah said, watching his careful ministrations. "My father passed last year. Left behind more debts than I knew existed. Coming west seemed like the only way to start fresh and work them off. That's a heavy burden for someone so young. I'm 20. That's old enough to handle my own affairs." James smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "I don't doubt it. Anyone who can work as hard as you do has plenty of spine." He pulled out a roll of clean bandaging from his satchel and began wrapping her hands with the same gentle precision. His fingers were warm against her skin, and Hannah found herself acutely aware of every point of contact. "There," he said finally, tying off the second bandage. "That should help, but you need to rest them. At least tonight, maybe tomorrow too if you can manage it. I can't miss work." "Martha needs, I'll talk to Martha." James stood, brushing dust from his knees. "And I'll talk to Mr. Chisum if I need to. You're no good to anyone if you work yourself into fever from infection. Why do you care?" The question came out sharper than Hannah intended, born from years of learning that kindness usually came with strings attached. James looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Because somebody should," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to be alone out here, trying to prove you can handle everything by yourself. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." He picked up the cloth bundle that had fallen earlier and placed it in her lap. "That's cornbread and some cold chicken. Martha thought you might have skipped supper again." Hannah's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, betraying her. She had skipped supper, too tired to do more than collapse onto her bunk. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." "Rest tonight," James repeated. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and walked off toward the stables, his spurs jingling softly in the darkness. Hannah sat on the bench long after he disappeared, her bandaged hands resting in her lap, the smell of herbs and kindness still lingering in the air. She woke before dawn despite her exhaustion, years of habit overriding her body's protests. Her hands throbbed beneath the bandages, but the sharp agony of the night before had dulled to a manageable ache. She unwrapped them carefully, examining the blisters in the pale morning light filtering through the cabin's single window. The salve had worked wonders. The wounds looked cleaner, less angry, though still tender to the touch. Her 2 roommates still slept soundly in their bunks. Mary, a girl of 18 who helped with laundry, and Teresa, a widow of 30 who worked alongside Hannah in the kitchen. Both had been kind enough when Hannah first arrived, but exhaustion left little room for friendship. They were colleagues bound by shared labor, nothing more. Hannah dressed quickly and quietly, wrapping her hands again as best she could manage. The bandages were awkward, but they'd have to do. She couldn't afford to miss work, no matter what James Walker had said. The morning air was cold enough to bite, and she pulled her shawl tighter as she hurried toward the kitchen house. Smoke already rose from the chimney, meaning Martha had beaten her there. Guilt gnawed at Hannah's stomach. Martha was nearing 60 and still outworked most of the younger help. She pushed through the kitchen door and stopped short. James Walker stood at the work table, an apron tied around his waist, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was cutting salt pork into thick slabs with confident, practiced movements. "What are you doing here?" Hannah blurted. James looked up, his face breaking into that transforming smile. "Morning to you too, Miss Carter. I'm helping Martha this morning. She seemed to think it was a good idea." Martha appeared from the pantry, her arms full of flour sacks. "Don't just stand there gaping, girl. Come help me with these biscuits." And before you start protesting, James volunteered, said he owed me a favor anyway. "I can't let you," Hannah began, looking between them. "You can and you will," Martha said firmly. "Your hands need another day at least to start healing proper. Now, you can help by doing light work. Mix the biscuit dough, but don't knead it. I'll handle that part. James here will manage the heavy lifting and the pork." Hannah wanted to argue, but the determination in both their faces told her it would be useless. She washed her hands carefully, gritting her teeth against the sting, and set to work measuring flour and buttermilk. The kitchen fell into a comfortable rhythm. Martha worked with efficient speed, her weathered hands shaping biscuits faster than Hannah could track. James proved surprisingly adept at kitchen work, moving through the space without getting underfoot and anticipating what needed to be done next. "You've done this before," Hannah observed, watching him stoke the fire in the massive stove with perfect timing. "Spent 2 years on a trail drive when I was younger," James said. "Cookie broke his arm halfway through, so a few of us had to take turns helping him. Learned real quick that feeding 30 hungry cowboys is harder than it looks. Try feeding them day after day for months on end," Martha said with a snort. "That's when you earn your stripes." The hours passed quickly. Hannah found herself relaxing despite her initial discomfort at having James in their workspace. He had an easy way about him, cracking jokes with Martha that made the old woman laugh in a way Hannah had rarely heard. He treated both women with the same respectful courtesy, never condescending or making Hannah feel like an invalid. When the breakfast rush came, Hannah carried lighter platters while James hauled the heavy pots of coffee and porridge out to the long tables where the ranch hands gathered. She caught several curious glances from the other cowboys, saw them nudge each other and grin when James passed by. One older hand, a grizzled man called Red Pete, called out as James refilled his coffee cup. "Didn't know you were changing professions, Walker. Kitchen work suit you?" "Suits me fine when the company's good," James replied easily, not rising to the bait. "Besides, somebody's got to make sure you boys remember your manners. The ladies work hard enough without dealing with your nonsense." That drew laughs from several of the men and silenced Pete's teasing. Hannah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. By mid-morning, the breakfast dishes were done and preparations for the noon meal underway. Martha shooed both James and Hannah out of the kitchen with strict orders to take a break. "Don't want to see either of you for at least an hour," Martha said. "James, you've got your own work to get to. Hannah, go sit somewhere that isn't this kitchen. That's an order." They found themselves walking together across the ranch yard, neither quite sure where they were headed. The sun had burned off the morning chill, and the day promised to be pleasant. "Thank you," Hannah said finally. You didn't have to give up your morning. Wasn't giving up anything important. I do have work, but the cattle aren't going anywhere, and Mr. Chisum's foreman knows where to find me if there's an emergency. James adjusted his hat, squinting up at the sun. Besides, I wanted to make sure you actually rested those hands. Seemed like the best way to guarantee it. You barely know me. Why go to all this trouble? James was quiet for a moment, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as they walked. They drifted toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the ranch property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided rare shade. You remind me of someone, he said finally. My sister, actually. Sarah. She was stubborn as a mule, worked herself near to death trying to keep our family afloat after Pa died. I was too young to help much, and she never asked for help anyway. Too proud. His voice went rough. She took sick one winter and never recovered. Doctor said if she'd rested when she first felt poorly, she might have made it. But she pushed through, and pushing through killed her. James, I'm so sorry. Was 10 years ago now, but I still think about it. Think about how things might have been different if someone had just made her stop and rest. So when I see someone working themselves bloody, literally bloody, I can't just walk on by. That's all. They reached the creek bank and stood watching the water flow past, clear and cold from the mountains. Hannah flexed her bandaged hands, feeling the pull of healing skin beneath the cloth. I'm not very good at accepting help, she admitted. After my father died, there were people who offered assistance, but it always came with expectations, with strings. I learned it was safer to rely on myself. I understand that, but not everyone's working an angle. Some folks are just decent. James turned to face her, his expression serious. I'm not asking anything from you, Hannah. I just don't want to see you hurt yourself. The use of her first name sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. You can call me Hannah if I can call you James. Deal. His smile returned, soft and genuine. Come on, let me show you something. He led her upstream, following a faint path through the cottonwoods. The creek curved around a bend, and suddenly they emerged into a small clearing where the water pooled into a quiet eddy. Wildflowers grew in profusion on the banks, yellows and purples nodding in the breeze. Found this spot my first week at the ranch, James said. Come here sometimes when I need to think. It's peaceful. It's beautiful, Hannah breathed. She'd been at Chisum Ranch for 6 months and never wandered far enough to discover this little sanctuary. They sat on a smooth boulder near the water's edge, and for a while neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt natural, like they'd known each other far longer than 24 hours. Tell me about Missouri, James said eventually. What was it like growing up there? Hannah found herself talking, sharing stories she hadn't told anyone since arriving in New Mexico territory. She told him about her childhood, about her mother who died when Hannah was 12, about her father's slow decline after losing his wife. She talked about the small farm they'd tried to maintain, about how the debts had piled up from bad crops and worse luck. James listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he was truly interested. In turn, he shared his own history. Growing up in Texas, losing his father to a rattlesnake bite when James was just 14. Working various ranches across Texas and New Mexico, learning cattle and horses from some of the best hands in the territory. Why Chisum Ranch? Hannah asked. Why stay here? John Chisum's hard but fair. Pays on time, treats his workers decent enough, and the land here, there's something about it. James gestured at the surrounding landscape, the endless sky and rolling plains dotted with mesas. It's harsh, but it's honest. You know what you're getting, I respect that. I'm still getting used to it, Hannah admitted. Sometimes the emptiness feels overwhelming, like you could disappear and the land wouldn't even notice. That's why you need people you can count on, The land's indifferent, but people don't have to be. The hour passed too quickly. They walked back to the ranch yard together, and Hannah felt reluctant to see James head off toward the corrals where the day's work awaited him. "How are your hands feeling?" he asked before parting. "Better. Much better than yesterday. Thank you for the salve and the bandages. Keep them wrapped another day or two, and if you need more salve, come find me. I keep extra in my gear." "I will." James hesitated, then said, "There's a dance in town next Saturday. Nothing fancy, just the usual gathering at the church hall. Would you want to go? With me, I mean." Hannah's heart kicked against her ribs. "I'd like that, but I'll need to make sure Martha can spare me." "I already asked her. She said if I was going to keep mooning around the kitchen, I might as well make my intentions clear and ask you proper." His ears had gone slightly red, and Hannah found it endearing. "Then yes, I'd be happy to go with you." His smile could have lit the entire territory. "Saturday evening, then. I'll borrow a wagon so we can ride in comfort." Hannah watched him walk away, his confident stride carrying him toward the stables. She touched her bandaged hands to her chest, feeling her heartbeat racing beneath her fingers. The week that followed was the longest and shortest of Hannah's life. Her hands healed steadily, the blisters scabbing over and the pain fading to a dull ache. She saw James in passing several times, and each encounter left her smiling for hours afterward. He'd tip his hat to her across the yard, or pause to ask how her hands were healing when their paths crossed near the well. The other kitchen workers noticed. Teresa cornered Hannah one evening as they prepared for bed. "That cowboy's sweet on you," Teresa said, her tone approving. "James Walker's a good man, better than most around here." "We're just friends," Hannah protested weakly. "Sure you are. That's why he spent a whole morning doing kitchen work, something I've never seen in 15 years, and why you go pink every time someone mentions his name." Mary giggled from her bunk. "You should have seen your face when he asked you to the dance. Thought you might faint right there." "I did not, you did," both women said in unison, then dissolved into laughter. Hannah couldn't help but join them, the sound feeling strange and wonderful after months of grim determination. Maybe this was what she'd been missing, she thought. Not just the possibility of romance with James, but friendship and lightness and hope. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm but not scorching, with a gentle breeze that kept the dust settled. Hannah had exactly one dress suitable for dancing, a simple calico in deep blue that she'd packed carefully at the bottom of her trunk. Teresa helped her press it and fix her hair, pinning it up in a style more elaborate than Hannah's usual practical braid. "You look lovely," Martha said when Hannah appeared in the kitchen that afternoon. The old woman's eyes were suspiciously bright. "James Walker's a lucky man." "We're just going to a dance," Hannah said, but she couldn't suppress her smile. Just going to a dance, sure." Martha made a shooing motion. "Go on, he's waiting for you by the gate." Hannah walked out into the late afternoon sun and saw James standing beside a small wagon, the ranch's gentlest mare hitched and waiting. He'd clearly made an effort, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his dark hair still damp from a recent washing. When he saw her, his expression made Hannah's breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He helped her up onto the wagon seat with careful attention to her still healing hands, then climbed up beside her. The drive to town would take about an hour, and Hannah found herself excited for every minute of it. They talked easily as the wagon rolled along the rutted road. James pointed out landmarks, telling her stories about the area. He showed her where a cattle drive had crossed the previous spring, where wild horses liked to graze in the early mornings, where an ancient Pueblo ruin stood on a distant mesa. "You really love this land," Hannah observed. "I do. Took me a while to find a place that felt like home, but this is it. The work's hard, but it's good work. And the people, well, some of them are pretty special." He glanced at her with a shy smile. The town of Roswell was small but lively, serving the scattered ranches and homesteads for miles around. The church hall buzzed with activity when they arrived, music already spilling out into the street. 3 fiddlers and a man with a guitar provided the entertainment, playing reels and waltzes with enthusiastic energy. James helped Hannah down from the wagon and offered his arm. She took it, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt sleeve. Inside, the hall had been decorated with streamers and lanterns. Long tables laden with food lined one wall, and people of all ages filled the space. Hannah recognized a few faces from the ranch, but many were strangers. "James Walker," a booming voice called out, and a large man with a magnificent mustache approached. "Heard you recording. About time you settled your attention on someone." "Sheriff Mason, this is Hannah Carter. She works at Chisum Ranch." "Hannah, this is Sheriff Tom Mason." Try not to hold his lack of manners against him. The sheriff laughed and shook Hannah's hand with surprising gentleness. "Pleasure, Miss Carter. You've picked a good one here. James helped track down some horse thieves for me last year. Got my grandson's pony back." "It was nothing," James said, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "Was everything to my grandson," the sheriff countered. Then he winked at Hannah. "Don't let him fool you into thinking he's just another drifting cowboy. He's got roots here, whether he admits it or not." More introductions followed. Hannah met families from neighboring ranches, townspeople, even a few Apache who traded regularly in Roswell and maintained peaceful relations with the settlers. Everyone seemed to know James, and everyone had a good word to say about him. Finally, the music shifted into a waltz and James turned to her. "May I have this dance, if your hands are up to it?" "I think I can manage," Hannah said, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. She hadn't danced since before her father died, and even then her experience was limited. James must have sensed her uncertainty. "Just follow my lead," he murmured as he placed one hand at her waist and took her hand gently with the other. "I won't let you stumble." He was true to his word. He led her through the waltz with confident grace, his movements sure and steady. Hannah stopped thinking about the steps and simply moved with him, caught up in the music and the warmth of his hand at her waist, and the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. They danced 3 waltzes and 2 reels before taking a break for refreshments. James brought her punch and they found seats near an open window where the breeze cooled their flushed faces. "Having a good time?" James asked. "The best time I've had since leaving Missouri," Hannah said honestly. "Thank you for asking me. Thank you for saying yes. I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" James shrugged, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable. "You're smart and strong and beautiful. I'm just a cowboy who'll probably never own more than a horse and a saddle." Hannah set down her cup and turned to face him fully. "James Walker, you are one of the kindest, most decent men I've ever met. You went out of your way to help me when you had no reason to. You treated my injuries and made me rest and gave up your morning to work in a kitchen so I could heal. You see people, really see them. That matters more than land or money." James stared at her, something intense and searching in his gaze. "Hannah Carter, I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them, bold and terrifying and wonderful. Hannah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. James reached for her hand, cradling it carefully. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I know you came out here to work off your father's debts and start fresh. I'm not trying to rush you or push you into anything. But I need you to know that I'm serious about this, about you." "I'm serious too," Hannah said. "I didn't expect this when I came to New Mexico territory. I thought I'd work hard, pay off my obligations, and figure out the rest later. But then you wrapped my hands and told me to rest, and everything changed. Can I kiss you? James asked, his voice rough. Yes. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, Hannah felt like the world had just rearranged itself into a better shape. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. They danced until late in the evening, then drove back to Chisum Ranch under a canopy of stars so thick it seemed impossible. James kept one arm around Hannah's shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling happier than she could remember. Can I court you proper? James asked as they neared the ranch. I'll talk to Mr. Chisum, make sure he knows my intentions are honorable. We can take our time, get to know each other better, but I want everyone to know that you're spoken for. I'd like that, Hannah said. Though I suspect everyone already knows, given how Sheriff Mason was talking. James laughed. True enough. Small towns don't keep secrets long. He walked her to the cabin door, both of them reluctant to end the evening. Finally, James bent and kissed her forehead. Sleep well, Hannah. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, James. Hannah floated into the cabin, barely noticing Teresa and Mary's excited questions. She answered in a happy daze, then lay in her bunk replaying every moment of the evening. The next months unfolded like a dream. James courted Hannah with old-fashioned determination, asking Mr. Chisum's permission formally, and promising to respect Hannah's reputation and position at the ranch. The cattle baron, a shrewd but fair man in his 50s, had given his blessing with a gruff admonition to James not to let romance interfere with work. It didn't. If anything, both Hannah and James threw themselves into their duties with renewed energy, but they found time for each other too. James would appear at the kitchen house after supper, and they'd walk by the creek or sit in the small clearing he'd shown her, talking about everything and nothing. Hannah learned that James was saving money to buy his own small ranch someday, just a few hundred acres where he could run cattle and horses. He had it all planned out, down to the location he'd been scouting near the Hondo River. Would you want to live on a ranch? James asked one evening in early fall. They sat on their boulder by the creek, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. I think so, Hannah said, considering carefully. If it meant building something with someone I loved, then yes, I'd work hard to make it succeed. You wouldn't miss town life. Having neighbors close by, James, I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I'm not afraid of isolation or hard work. What I want is a home. A real home with someone who values me. Everything else is just details. James took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. Her hands had long since healed, though she was more careful now about protecting them. The scars remained, faint white lines across her palms that reminded her of the night James had first wrapped them. I want to give you that home, James said. I want to marry you, Hannah. Not right away, not until you're ready, but I want you to know that's where my heart is headed. That's where mine is headed too, Hannah said, squeezing his hand. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and Hannah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The proposal came on a cold December evening, the first real frost of winter whitening the ground. James had been acting mysterious all week, and Hannah suspected something was brewing. When he asked her to take a walk after supper despite the cold, she bundled up in her warmest shawl and followed. He led her to their clearing by the creek, and Hannah gasped. He'd strung lanterns in the cottonwood trees, their warm light creating a magical glow in the darkness. A small fire burned in a ring of stones, and blankets were spread on the ground nearby. James, Hannah breathed, this is beautiful. Not as beautiful as you. He took both her hands and she saw that his were trembling slightly. "Hannah Carter, these past months with you have been the best of my life. You make me laugh and challenge me to be better and see the world in ways I never did before. I can't imagine my future without you in it." He released one of her hands to pull a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a single small diamond. "It's not much," James said, "but it's all I could afford right now. Later, when we have our ranch established, I'll get you a better one." "It's perfect," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "James, yes. Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that warmed her despite the winter cold. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like children. "I talked to Mr. Chisum," James said. "He's agreed to sell me 200 acres along the Hondo at a fair price, payment over 5 years. It's not much, but it's a start. We can build a cabin, run some cattle and horses. It'll be hard work, but we can make it into something good." "When?" Hannah asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I was thinking spring. March or April, after the worst of winter's passed, but before calving season hits full swing. That gives us time to plan and save more money, and it gives you time to make sure this is really what you want." "I already know what I want," Hannah said firmly. "I want you. I want our life together. Spring is perfect." They stayed by the creek until the fire burned down to embers, talking about their plans. James had already started gathering materials for a cabin, trading work with other ranch hands to get lumber cut and hauled. Hannah had been sewing in her spare time, building up household goods slowly but steadily. When they finally walked back to the ranch buildings, Hannah wore James's ring and his promise, and her heart felt full enough to burst. The winter passed in a flurry of preparations. Hannah continued working in the kitchen, but Martha had lightened her load, bringing in another girl to help with the heaviest work. Hannah used her extra time to sew curtains and quilts, to preserve food, to prepare for the life she'd build with James. James spent every free moment working on their cabin. Several of the ranch hands pitched in, and by late February the structure stood complete on the land James had purchased. It was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was solid and weatherproof. James had even built a front porch where they could sit in the evenings. They set the wedding for the first Saturday in April. Reverend Mills from Roswell would perform the ceremony at the church, followed by a celebration at the ranch. Mr. Chisum had given his blessing, and even offered to provide a steer for the feast, his gruff way of showing approval. Hannah wrote to distant cousins in Missouri, inviting them but not expecting anyone to make the long journey. To her surprise, her father's brother wrote back, saying he and his wife would attend. Hannah hadn't seen Uncle Henry since she was a child, but the gesture touched her deeply. The night before the wedding, Martha pulled Hannah aside in the kitchen. The old woman's eyes were damp as she pressed a package into Hannah's hands. "This was my mother's," Martha said. "She brought it from Tennessee when she came west. I never had daughters to pass it to, and my sons don't have use for such things. I'd be honored if you wore it tomorrow." Hannah unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a beautiful lace veil, yellowed slightly with age but still delicate and lovely. "Martha, I can't take this. It's too precious." "You can and you will. You've become like a daughter to me this past year, child. Let an old woman give you a proper wedding gift." Hannah hugged Martha tight, both women crying now. "Thank you for everything, for teaching me and protecting me and becoming my friend." "Go on now," Martha said, wiping her eyes. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's your big day." The wedding dawned clear and bright, the April sun warming the land after winter's grip. Hannah dressed in a new gown she'd sewn herself, simple white cotton with embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Teresa and Mary helped her with her hair, weaving wildflowers through the braids before settling Martha's veil in place. "You're beautiful," Teresa said, stepping back to admire their work. "James won't know what hit him," Mary added with a grin. Uncle Henry and Aunt Margaret had arrived late the previous night. Uncle Henry walked Hannah to the church, his arm steady under her trembling hand. "Your father would be proud," Uncle Henry said quietly. "You've done well for yourself, Hannah. James seems like a fine man." "He is, the finest." The church was packed with ranch hands, townspeople, and friends. As Hannah walked down the aisle, she saw James waiting at the altar, and the look on his face made her eyes fill with happy tears. He wore a new suit, his hair carefully combed, his eyes shining with love and awe. Reverend Mills performed a simple but moving ceremony. When it came time for vows, James took Hannah's hands and spoke from his heart. "Hannah, you came into my life when I wasn't looking for anyone. You showed me that strength comes in many forms and that accepting help isn't weakness. You've made me want to be better, to build something lasting. I promise to love you and protect you and partner with you in all things, for as long as we both shall live." Hannah's voice shook but stayed steady as she made her own vows. "James, you saw me when I was trying to be invisible. You treated my wounds and told me to rest when no one else cared. You've shown me that kindness and love still exist in this hard world. I promise to love you and support you and build our dreams together, for as long as we both shall live." The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and when James kissed her, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration at Chisum Ranch lasted well into the night. The steer Mr. Chisum had provided had been roasted to perfection, and there was enough food to feed everyone twice over. The fiddlers from town played, and Hannah and James danced until their feet ached. Sheriff Mason gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. To James and Hannah Walker. "May your love be as endless as the New Mexico sky, and as solid as the land beneath your feet." As the evening drew to a close, James and Hannah slipped away to the wagon waiting to take them to their new home. Friends and well-wishers threw rice and called out congratulations as they drove off into the star-filled night. The cabin looked magical in the moonlight. James had thought of everything, laying in firewood and supplies, making sure the house was ready for Hannah to move into immediately. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Walker," James said softly. "I love the sound of that," Hannah replied. She looked around the cabin, seeing the furniture James had built, the curtains she'd sewn hanging at the windows, their joined lives beginning right here. That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Hannah traced the scar on James's shoulder from a roping accident and thought about how far they'd both come. From that evening when her hands had been blistered and bleeding to this moment of perfect contentment, the journey seemed both impossibly short and infinitely long. "What are you thinking?" James murmured, his arm tightening around her. "That I'm the luckiest woman in New Mexico territory. Maybe in the whole world. I'm the lucky one. I found you. We found each other," Hannah corrected. "And now we get to build our whole future together. Starting tomorrow, tonight we just rest." The first year of marriage tested them in ways Hannah hadn't anticipated. Running a small ranch was brutally hard work, especially when trying to build up herds and reputation simultaneously. James worked dawn to dusk, and Hannah labored beside him when she wasn't managing the household. They'd bought 20 head of cattle and 3 horses to start. The cattle were scrubby range animals, but James had a good eye for breeding stock. The horses were young, barely broke, but showed promise. Every dollar they earned got funneled back into the ranch, buying more stock or improving the property. Hannah learned to rope and brand, to deliver calves and treat injuries. Her hands, which had healed so carefully under James's attention, grew calloused again with different work. But she didn't mind. This labor was for them, for their future. The loneliness was harder to adjust to. Their nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and days would pass when Hannah saw no one but James. She missed Martha and the other women from the ranch, missed having other people around. But James seemed to understand without her saying anything. And once a month they'd make the journey to Roswell for supplies and socializing. By their first anniversary, they'd doubled their cattle herd through careful breeding and good luck with the weather. James had broken all 3 horses to saddle, and they'd sold 2 for a nice profit, using the money to buy lumber for a barn. Their garden had flourished under Hannah's care, and she'd put up enough vegetables to see them through the winter. On the evening of their anniversary, James rode in from checking the north pasture to find Hannah standing on the porch, her hand pressed to her stomach, a strange expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, swinging down from his horse. "Are you hurt?" No, I'm fine." "Better than fine, actually." Hannah smiled, though her eyes were nervous. "James, I'm pregnant." He froze, the reins dropping from his hand. "Pregnant, are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I've missed 2 cycles and I've been sick every morning for a week. Teresa told me what signs to look for and, well, I have them all." James let out a whoop of joy that probably carried for miles. He ran to the porch and swept Hannah up carefully, spinning her once before setting her down and immediately looking worried. "Should I not have done that? Are you okay?" "Do you need to sit down?" Hannah laughed, the sound bright with happiness and relief at his reaction. "I'm fine. I'm going to have a baby, not turn into glass. But James, are we ready for this? We're still getting established and money's so tight. We'll manage. We'll figure it out together just like we figure everything else out." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, all written across his face. "We're having a baby. Hannah, we're going to be parents. I know, it's terrifying and wonderful all at once. Do you need a doctor? Should we go to town?" "Eventually, yes. But there's time. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. I'll be fine." Still, James fussed over her for weeks, insisting she rest more and work less. Hannah complied to a point, but she refused to become an invalid. She continued her daily work, just more carefully. As summer turned to fall and Hannah's belly swelled, they prepared for the baby's arrival. James built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there wasn't a single rough edge. Hannah sewed tiny gowns and blankets. They'd sent word to Martha, who promised to come stay when Hannah's time drew near. The baby arrived on a cold January night, 2 weeks before Hannah's due date. James had ridden like mad to fetch the doctor and Martha from Roswell, terrified and trying not to show it. By the time they arrived, Hannah's labor was well advanced. Martha took charge immediately, sending James to boil water and gather clean linens. The doctor, an elderly man named Henderson, examined Hannah and pronounced everything normal, if moving faster than expected. "First babies usually take their time," he said, "but this little one seems eager to meet the world." The labor was hard but mercifully short. Just after midnight, Hannah delivered a healthy baby boy with a full head of dark hair and strong lungs. When the doctor placed the baby in Hannah's arms, she wept with joy and exhaustion. "James," she called weakly, and her husband appeared at her side instantly, his face pale. He'd clearly been terrified the entire time, though he'd tried to hide it. "Hannah, are you all right?" "Is the baby? We're fine. We have a son." She shifted the bundle so James could see the tiny, perfect face. "Do you want to hold him?" James took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at his son with an expression of wonder. "He's so small, so perfect. Hello there, little one, I'm your father." The baby quieted at the sound of James's voice, his tiny fist waving in the air. "What should we name him?" Hannah asked. They discussed names but never quite settled on one. "I was thinking William after my father, if that's all right with you." "William Walker, I like it." Hannah smiled tiredly. "Welcome to the world, William." Martha stayed for 2 weeks, helping Hannah recover and teaching both new parents the essentials of infant care. James proved surprisingly adept at diapering and soothing, though he remained constantly worried that he'd somehow break their son. "Babies are sturdier than they look," Martha assured him. "You're doing fine. Both of you are natural parents." By the time Martha returned to Chisum Ranch, Hannah and James had found their rhythm. William was an easy baby, sleeping reasonably well and eating with enthusiasm. Hannah marveled at how completely he'd changed their lives. Everything now revolved around this tiny person who depended on them for everything. James proved to be a devoted father. No matter how hard the day's work had been, he always made time to hold William, to talk to him in a soft voice about the ranch and the horses, and all the things they'd do together when William was older. "You'll have your own horse," James told his son one evening as Hannah watched from the doorway. "And I'll teach you to rope and ride. But first, you'll learn to respect the land and the animals, to be fair and honest, to treat people with kindness the way your mother taught me." Hannah's heart swelled listening to him. This was the life she'd dreamed of, the home she'd yearned for. Hard work and tired bodies, yes, but also love and purpose and family. The years flowed by like the creek through their property, sometimes rushing, sometimes gentle, but always moving forward. William grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious child, following his father around the ranch and trying to help with whatever James was doing. When William was 3, Hannah became pregnant again. This time, she was less anxious, more confident in her body's ability to do what needed doing. Their daughter arrived on a warm May morning, tiny and perfect with Hannah's light hair and James's steady gaze. They named her Grace, because Hannah said that's what she represented, the grace of God and good fortune that had brought them all together. William was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her or show her his treasures. Interesting rocks, bird feathers, bits of shed snakeskin. James and Hannah watched their children with hearts full to bursting. The ranch prospered slowly but surely. By the time William was 5 and Grace was 2, they had over 100 head of cattle and a small but respected reputation for quality horses. James had expanded the barn and built a proper chicken coop. Hannah's garden had grown into a small orchard, young apple and peach trees that would bear fruit in a few more years. They'd made friends among their neighbors, the other ranching families scattered across the territory. Once a month, weather permitting, several families would gather at one ranch or another for a day of socializing and shared work. The men would work on whatever project the host needed help with while the women cooked and minded the collective children. Hannah had never been happier. The loneliness of those early years had faded, replaced by a sense of community and belonging. She had her family, her friends, her purpose. On a warm evening in late summer, when William was 7 and Grace was 4, the family sat on their porch watching the sun set. William was practicing his roping on a fence post, determined to master the skill before his next birthday. Grace sat on Hannah's lap, playing with a corn husk doll Hannah had made. James reached over and took Hannah's free hand, lacing their fingers together. She looked at him questioningly. "Just remembering," he said quietly. "That night when I found you by the kitchen house, your hands bleeding from work, never thought we'd end up here." "Neither did I," Hannah admitted. "I was so alone then, so determined to just survive on my own. I thought accepting help was weakness. And now I know that accepting help was the bravest thing I ever did. It opened the door to everything we have now." James raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, the same spot where the worst of the blisters had been all those years ago. The scars had long since faded, barely visible anymore. "I love you, Hannah Walker." "I love you too, James Walker." "Mama, Papa, look," William shouted, having successfully lassoed the fence post. "I did it." "Good job, son," James called back. "Now do it 9 more times in a row, and then we'll call it mastered." William groaned but set about trying again with determined concentration. Grace wiggled off Hannah's lap and ran to join her brother, demanding he teach her too, even though she was far too small to handle a rope effectively. William, with the patience of a born teacher, knelt down and showed her how to make a loop, his serious face so like James's that Hannah felt her heart squeeze. "We did good," James said, watching their children. "We did," Hannah agreed. "We really did." The ranch continued to grow over the following years, though never into anything grand. James and Hannah were content with their modest success, preferring to maintain a size they could manage themselves with help from William as he grew older. They added a room onto the cabin when Grace complained about sharing space with her brother, and built a proper workshop where James could work on tack and tools during bad weather. When William turned 14, James bought him his first real horse, a 3-year-old gelding with good conformation and a calm temperament. The joy on William's face reminded Hannah of James's expression on their wedding day. Pure, complete happiness. Grace proved to have a gift with the chickens and garden, taking over their care entirely by the time she was 10. She sold eggs and vegetables in Roswell, saving her earnings in a tin box under her bed, though she wouldn't say what she was saving for. The family attended church in Roswell most Sundays, a practice Hannah had insisted on. It gave them connection to the community and provided the children with schooling at the small schoolhouse the town had built. William was an indifferent student but excelled at arithmetic. Grace loved reading and would devour any book she could get her hands on. On William's 16th birthday, James took him out to the north pasture, just the two of them. Hannah watched them ride off together, her throat tight with emotion. Her baby boy was nearly a man now, tall and strong and capable. When they returned hours later, William was grinning ear to ear. James looked satisfied. "I'm giving William 10 acres on the north end," James announced at supper that evening. "His own piece of land to manage. He can run his own stock on it, make his own decisions. The profits are his." William's eyes were shining. "Thank you, Pa, I won't let you down." "I know you won't, son. You're a fine rancher already. This is just making it official." Grace looked between them, then at her parents. "What about me?" "When you turn 16, you'll get the same," Hannah said. 10 acres and the freedom to manage them as you see fit. Fair is fair." "But that's 2 whole years away," Grace protested, though she was smiling. "Then you have 2 years to plan what you'll do with them," James said. "Use the time wisely." True to their word, on Grace's 16th birthday, they deeded her 10 acres on the south end of the property. Grace surprised them all by announcing she wanted to raise horses, not cattle. "The future's in horses," she said confidently. "Everyone needs good horses, and there's never enough to go around. Plus, I like them better than cattle. They're smarter." James taught her everything he knew about horse breeding and breaking, and within 2 years, Grace had a small but respected string of working horses that commanded good prices. Hannah watched her children grow into capable, independent adults with pride and a little sadness. She and James weren't old yet, both only in their early 40s, but time was moving so quickly now. Where had the years gone? On their 20th wedding anniversary, James took Hannah back to the clearing by the creek where he'd proposed. He'd planned it in secret with the children, who promised to manage everything at the ranch for the night. The clearing looked much as it had that December evening so long ago, except now James had built a permanent fire ring and a small shelter with a bench. They came here sometimes when they needed to talk or just be together away from the demands of daily life. 20 years, James said, pulling Hannah close. Feels like forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Sometimes I still feel like that girl with bleeding hands, and then I look at our children and realize decades have passed. Any regrets? Not a single one. You. Only that I didn't meet you sooner. But then again, maybe we needed to be exactly who we were, exactly when we were, for everything to work out the way it did. They sat on the bench, Hannah leaning into James's familiar warmth. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere nearby an owl hooted softly. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you just walked past me that night?" Hannah asked. "If you hadn't stopped to help all the time, and it terrifies me. Everything good in my life stems from that moment. You, our children, this land we've built together. All of it started because I saw someone in pain and couldn't just walk away. I'm glad you couldn't. I'm glad you were exactly the kind of man who would stop and help. I'm glad you were exactly the kind of woman who let me, eventually." James kissed her temple. "Here's to 20 more years, Hannah Walker. And 20 after that, if we're blessed. I'll drink to that." They stayed at the clearing until late, talking and remembering, then walked home hand in hand under the stars. The next chapter of their lives brought new challenges. William fell in love with a neighbor girl, Sarah Thompson, and at 19, announced his intention to marry. James and Hannah had seen it coming, the way William found excuses to ride over to the Thompson place, the way he went quiet and happy when Sarah's name came up in conversation. They held the wedding at the Walker Ranch on a perfect September day. Watching William exchange vows with Sarah, Hannah couldn't help but cry, remembering her own wedding day, the hopes and dreams that had carried her forward. "He'll be fine," James whispered, his arm around her waist. "We raised him right. I know. Doesn't make it easier to watch him start his own life." William and Sarah built a cabin on William's 10 acres, and soon the sound of hammering and laughter filled that corner of the property. James helped, of course, and Hannah and Sarah worked together to set up the household. A year later, William and Sarah welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Hannah after her grandmother. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Hannah wept with joy. The circle was continuing, life flowing into life. Grace showed no interest in settling down, too focused on her horses and her business. "I'm only 19, she'd say when anyone asked about suitors. "There's time enough for all that later. Right now I have work to do." Hannah understood, recognizing her daughter's fierce independence as an echo of her own younger self. Grace would find her way in her own time. The ranch took on a new rhythm with 3 generations working the land. Little Hannah toddled after her grandfather, just as William had once done. James proved to be as patient and loving a grandfather as he'd been a father, always ready to tell stories or answer endless questions. On a crisp October morning when Hannah was 45 and James was 49, they stood on their porch watching the activity around the ranch. William was working cattle in the near pasture with his father. Grace was in the training pen with a young horse. Sarah hung laundry while little Hannah played nearby. "We built something good," James said quietly. "Something that'll last beyond us. We did, together." "Always together," James agreed. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the faint scars on her palm. "Remember when I first wrapped these hands, told you to rest? I remember thinking you were presumptuous and kind and entirely too good to be true. And now I know you're all of those things and more. You're my home, James Walker. You always have been." He pulled her close, and they stood together in the morning sun, watching their family and their legacy take shape around them. More years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow. James's old injury from a roping accident came back to haunt him, his shoulder growing stiff and painful. Hannah developed a cough one winter that took months to fully resolve. They were aging, undeniably, but they were aging together. Grace finally fell in love at 23 with a horse trader from California named Daniel Morris. He'd come through Roswell with a string of fine horses, and Grace had gone to look at his stock. She came home engaged 3 weeks later, much to everyone's surprise. "When you know," Grace said, echoing words her mother had spoken long ago. Daniel was a good man, quiet and steady with a deep love for horses that matched Grace's own. They married in spring and combined their operations, making Grace's corner of the ranch into a thriving horse breeding operation. William and Sarah had 3 more children, filling their cabin with noise and laughter. James and Hannah's house, by contrast, grew quieter but no less full of love. They'd slowed down, letting the younger generation take on more of the heavy work, but they were far from idle. Hannah kept the garden and chickens, baked bread every other day, and helped Sarah with the grandchildren. James maintained the equipment, trained young horses when his shoulder allowed, and served as advisor to William and Daniel on ranch matters. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. All 4 grandchildren were there, ranging from 9-year-old Hannah to 2-year-old James, named after his grandfather. Grace was heavily pregnant with her first child, due any day. As the sun set and the children played in the yard, the adults sat on the expanded porch James had built years ago. William raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us that love means partnership, that hard work builds character, and that family is everything. Thank you for showing us how to live good lives." "Hear, hear," everyone echoed. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, James and Hannah sat alone in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. 30 years, Hannah said wonderingly. "We've been married 30 years. Best 30 years of my life. Mine, too." She leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space she'd occupied for 3 decades. "Do you remember what you said that first night, when you wrapped my hands? I told you to rest tonight. You did. And I fought you on it because I didn't know how to accept help. But you learned. You taught me. You taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, that love means partnership, that 2 people working together can build something neither could create alone." James turned to kiss her forehead. "You taught me plenty too, taught me that strength comes in many forms. That a person can be soft and strong at the same time. That home isn't a place but a person." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars come out one by one. The next morning, Grace went into labor. Hannah stayed with her daughter, coaching her through the contractions while Daniel paced anxiously outside. The baby, a boy, arrived just after noon with his mother's determination and his father's calm temperament. They named him Thomas, and when Hannah held her grandson for the first time, she felt the weight of time and love and legacy all bundled into one tiny, perfect package. "This is what it's all about," she told Grace. "This continuation, this passing on of love and life." Grace, exhausted and radiant, smiled at her mother. "I understand now why you and Pa worked so hard to build something lasting. You weren't just building a ranch, you were building a foundation for all of us. And you'll do the same for Thomas. That's how it works. Each generation builds on what came before." James and Hannah celebrated their 40th anniversary with less fanfare but no less love. Their grandchildren now numbered 7, with an 8th on the way. William had taken over full management of the cattle operation. Grace and Daniel's horse breeding business had expanded beyond New Mexico, with buyers coming from as far as California and Texas to purchase their stock. The ranch now sprawled over 1,000 acres, a far cry from the original 200 James had purchased so long ago. Each of their children had expanded their holdings through careful purchase and hard work. Hannah was 60, her hair more gray than brown now, her hands permanently gnarled from decades of labor. But she moved with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth and her place in the world. James, at 64, had slowed considerably. His shoulder gave him constant trouble, and he tired more easily than he once had. But his eyes still lit up when Hannah entered a room, and his love for her remained as strong as the day he'd first wrapped her bleeding hands. On a warm spring evening, they took a slow walk to the creek, to the clearing that had witnessed so many important moments in their lives. James had to stop twice to rest, and Hannah worried about the tightness in his breathing. "Are you all right?" she asked when they finally reached their destination. "I'm fine, just old." He sat on the bench with a groan of relief. "This never used to be such a long walk. We're both old now, that's what happens when you live long enough." James pulled her down beside him. "Any regrets, Hannah?" "Looking back on 40 years, is there anything you'd change?" Hannah considered the question seriously, reviewing their life together in her mind. The struggles and triumphs, the children and grandchildren, the endless work and precious moments of rest. "Not a single thing," she said finally. "Every choice led us here to this moment. I wouldn't trade any of it. Not even those first hard years, when money was so tight and we didn't know if we'd make it, especially not those years. They taught us what we were made of. They proved we could handle anything together." "You're remarkable, you know that. I've thought so since that first night. Even when you were stubborn and refusing help, I could see your strength shining through. You brought out the best in me, James. You saw me when I was trying to be invisible. You insisted I matter. That changed everything." They sat in peaceful silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The creek burbled past, eternal and unchanging. Hannah felt a deep contentment settle over her, a sense of completion. "I'm tired," James admitted finally. "Really tired. In my bones, you know." "I know, me too. But it's a good tired, the kind that comes from a life well lived." "It is," Hannah agreed, though worry gnawed at her heart. James had been increasingly fatigued lately, and she wondered if he was sicker than he let on. They made their way back to the house slowly as darkness fell. James went straight to bed, and Hannah sat up for a while, watching him sleep, memorizing the lines of his face in the lamplight. The next morning, James didn't wake up. Hannah found him lying peacefully in their bed, his expression serene. He'd passed in his sleep, quietly and without pain, slipping away between one breath and the next. The grief hit her like a physical blow. She sat beside him, holding his cooling hand, unable to process a world without James Walker in it. William found her there an hour later, still sitting in stunned silence. He took one look at his father's still form and his mother's devastated face and understood immediately. "Oh, Ma," he whispered, gathering her into his arms as she finally began to cry. The funeral was held 3 days later, with half the county in attendance. James had been respected and liked by almost everyone who'd known him. Stories were told, tears were shed, and Hannah sat through it all in a fog of disbelief. They buried him on a rise overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he'd loved and the family he'd built. The gravestone was simple: James Walker, 1854–1918. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he saw what others missed. The weeks after James's death were the hardest of Hannah's life. She'd lost her father and mother, survived poverty and hardship, endured pain and fear. But nothing had prepared her for the absence of James. He'd been her partner for 40 years, her other half, her home. Without him, she felt unmoored, adrift in a suddenly hostile world. Her children rallied around her. William insisted she move in with him and Sarah, but Hannah refused. She stayed in the cabin she and James had built, surrounded by memories and the ghost of his presence. Slowly, painfully, she found her way through grief. She clung to her grandchildren, who didn't understand death but knew their grandmother needed extra hugs. She worked in her garden, finding solace in the rhythm of growth and harvest. She went to church and accepted casseroles from well-meaning neighbors. On the 6-month anniversary of James's death, Hannah walked to the creek clearing alone. She sat on the bench and talked to him, telling him about the grandchildren, about the ranch, about how much she missed him. "I know you'd tell me to keep living," she said to the empty air, "to find joy again. But it's so hard without you, James. You were my everything." A breeze stirred the cottonwood leaves, sounding almost like a whisper. Hannah closed her eyes and let herself remember. The night they'd met, her hands blistered and bleeding, his gentle care. Their first dance, their first kiss, their wedding day. Building the ranch together, raising their children, growing old side by side. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for loving me, for 40 years of partnership and purpose. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." She sat until the sun began to set, then walked home with a lighter heart. The grief would never fully leave, she knew, but neither would the love. James had changed her life irrevocably, and his influence would continue through their children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. Life gradually regained its color. Hannah threw herself into helping with the grandchildren, passing on the skills and stories that might otherwise be lost. She taught the girls to sew and garden, the boys to cook and preserve food. She told them about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive through stories of his kindness and strength and unwavering love. On what would have been their 45th anniversary, Hannah stood at James's grave with her entire family around her. 7 grandchildren, with an 8th on the way. William and Sarah still happily married after 26 years. Grace and Daniel, their horse operation now the most respected in the territory. "He'd be so proud," William said, his arm around his mother's shoulders. "He is proud," Hannah corrected gently. "Love doesn't end with death. He's still with us in every choice we make, every value we uphold." She lived 5 more years, active and engaged despite her advancing age. She saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, taught them to bake bread and tell stories. She maintained her garden until the very end, her gnarled hands still capable of coaxing life from the soil. Hannah Carter Walker passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 65. Exactly 50 years after arriving at Chisum Ranch with nothing but a worn carpetbag and determination. They buried her beside James on the rise overlooking the ranch, and her gravestone read, "Hannah Walker, 1858–1923. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she taught us to accept help with grace." The Walker Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family with the stories and values that Hannah and James had instilled. Every Walker child learned about their great-great-grandparents, about the night they met when her hands were blistered from work, and he wrapped them gently and told her to rest. They learned that accepting help isn't weakness, that love means partnership, and that a life built on kindness and hard work leaves a legacy that echoes through time. The clearing by the creek became a family landmark, a place where walkers went to think and remember and connect with their roots. The cottonwood trees grew tall and strong, their leaves whispering stories of the past to anyone who would listen. And so the story of Hannah and James lived on, not just in memory but in the thriving ranch they'd built, the family they'd raised, and the values they'd embodied. Two people who'd found each other in the harsh New Mexico territory in 1878, who'd built something beautiful from nothing, who'd loved each other through 40 years of joy and struggle. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the land, still breed horses and cattle, still maintain the cabin where it all began. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind is just right, they swear they can hear whispered conversations from the creek, the voices of two people who found their home in each other and built a legacy that would span over a century. The bandages James first wrapped around Hannah's blistered hands, saved and carefully preserved by Hannah herself, eventually made their way into a family trunk. Future generations would take them out sometimes, marveling at the simple cloth that symbolized the beginning of everything they knew. Those bandages represented more than first aid. They represented care given when it wasn't required, kindness offered to a stranger, the first thread in a tapestry that would grow to encompass hundreds of lives across multiple generations. In the old family Bible, Hannah had written in her careful hand, "We are all broken sometimes. We all need help. The greatest strength is knowing when to accept it, and the greatest love is offering it freely, expecting nothing in return." This is what James taught me, and what I hope to teach you all. The Walker Ranch stands to this day, a testament to two people who chose love over loneliness, partnership over pride, and building together over going it alone. And every Walker child, when they turn 18, is taken to the creek clearing and told the story of their ancestors, of the cowboy who saw a woman in pain and chose to help, and the woman who was brave enough to accept that help and build a life from it. That story, more than any inheritance of land or money, is the true legacy of Hannah and James Walker. The understanding that love begins with seeing another person's pain and choosing in that moment to ease it.